Okay. Now the tricky part is pouring the wine must without making a mess all over. This tends to be somewhat of a messy process. Okay, give it a couple shakes and move it over to the other jug. Just, there you go, perfect.
Anything closer?
Back to the first one. Now we're going to airlock the must, the wine must, let it cool down until it's 90 degrees or below. You don't want to put your yeast in at above 90 degrees because if you do, the temperature will kill the yeast and your wine won't ferment. The wine is cooled down to about 90 degrees. Now it's time to add the yeast. 1 package of yeast is made for 5 gallons of wine. This particular yeast is getting a little bit old, so it's losing its potency. I'm going to put about half a package in each gallon. All you do is pour it in, let it settle. The yeast will start growing immediately. The yeast will start growing immediately. It should start bubbling really well in about 12 hours. Overall, it'll take about 72 hours to do a primary fermentation. Once the bubbling slows down to less than 1 bubble a minute, I'll rack the wine. That means siphon the wine from these gallon jars and 2 more clean gallon jars, put the airlocks back on, and let it do a secondary fermentation for about a week more or less. Once the airlocks completely stop bubbling, then it'll be time to bottle the wine. As soon as wine starts bubbling well, probably tomorrow, I'll show you what it looks like. Thank you. The plum wine has been perking along for about 24 hours now. You get in close here, you should be able to see bubbles rising and happily growing there in the wine. That's all the yeast converting the sugar into alcohol. And slide on up, and the airlock is bubbling away nice and steady. Go on over to the other bottle. Airlock is bubbling along very happily. This one, as you can see, fermenting so actively, the foam is coming right up the neck, and bubbles are actively going in this wine. The temperature of the house and the rate of fermentation, the process should be done with a primary fermentation in about 72 hours. And once the bubbles slow down to less than 1 per minute, I'll rack the wine into clean gallon jugs. The reason I rack it into clean gallon jugs with secondary fermentation is so that the bulk of the sediment from the fermenting process will settle in these first 2 bottles or jugs, and then in the secondary fermentation, which is much slower and should take about a week to 2 weeks before it finishes, I'll get a fine amount of sediment in the bottom, so that when I finally bottle it, the bottled wine should be really clear, no real sediment in the bottom. Okay, we'll come back and check this out in about a week, once the primary or in a couple of days once primary fermentation is done.